So welcome everybody to today's online webinar on climate reporting, climate journalism, and in particular on the past climate conference, the COP26. So today's event is being recorded. It's being done in English, but we have a Russian interpretation that you can choose in your Zoom account if you click on the little globe in the lower right part of the screen. And today's event is part of the so-called Online Journalism in-Depth project that is being done by n-ost and by two other media partners, by Publica and by Zaborona. And the project began a few months ago, and it will go on for 3.5 years. And it has 3 topical strains. One of them is climate change. The other ones are not so interesting for today's event, but they have equal importance for the project. They are health and information society. And the idea of the project is that we bring together media partners and journalists from 4 countries from the European Eastern Partnership. And these countries are Armenia, Belarus, Georgia, and Ukraine. And there is 1 media partner from each country working on one of those topics. And the idea is that the project participants get an opportunity to sharpen their journalistic profile, to specify their work on one particular topic. Of course, in the context of today's event, this is climate change. And actually, at the end of the project, we want to have 3 networks, 3 thematic hubs, which bring together as many as possible journalists from those 4 countries, but also experts and bloggers and other people working on this very topic. So yes, we hope to be able to share with you a project website very soon, but I think this should suffice at this point. And the project is funded by the German Ministry for Economic Development and Cooperation. And today's experts, today's main speakers are Olga Boyko and Mariam Device. And I will briefly introduce both of them. So Olga is the coordinator of the Climate Action Network in Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. She's based in Kiev, and she has joined the climate movement as an activist in 2015 in Ukraine. And since 2016, she has worked she has worked in online communications in the region of Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and Central Asia. She was a volunteer and collaborated with several environmental organizations, has been involved in educational activities on climate change, and she took part in several UN conferences on climate change and those COPs, which the last one is the topic of today's event. And she has also coordinated the climate march in Kiev in 2019. And she's a board member of the Ukrainian Climate Network. So very happy to have you with us today, Olga.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for taking the time. And our second expert is Mariam. She's joining us from Edinburgh, where she is now doing a master in environment and development at the University of Edinburgh. And she's working with a Georgian NGO called Green Alternative. And this NGO has the job of studying climate change issues and impacts of development projects. So she also works for the Adaptation Fund CSO network. And she is following AF projects in Georgia and in the South Caucasus and generally, and she's providing policy recommendations to the fund, to the Adaptation Fund. I'm also very happy that Mariam can join us. And thank you so much for being with us. And today's event will function the following way. So first, our 2 speakers will briefly introduce themselves, and then they want to know who else is joining us today and learn a little bit about you. And then they will present the COP and the so-called Paris Agreement. Afterwards, they will speak about the 4 countries which are related to the Online Journalism in Depth project, so Armenia, Belarus, Georgia, and Ukraine. We will then have some time for questions, and later they will present some recommendations, some best practices, how to do journalistic work on such conferences, or how to cover these kinds of negotiations. So then I think Olga begins, right? So the floor is yours.
Yeah, I can begin, but Mariam, you can share the presentation because you will then follow with the COP. I'll just thank you for this introduction. I'll just add just a few words on the Climate Action Network, because I'm not sure if you're familiar with this network. It exists in many regions, and ours is just one of the nodes. So one of the regional kind of sub networks, and this network exists for more than 30 years, 31 years, and its primarily focus has always been climate policy. So it worked during these negotiations, the climate conferences of the UN, for as long as these conferences have existed. And this is why I am kind of underlying the fact that we are such network for the post-Soviet countries, and this is also what we try to do, is to raise the awareness of the civil society in our countries about the conference, about the climate policy trends in the world, and kind of translate this international language into the regional, but also vice versa, like to tell the world about our countries, to open up a bit of information about what's going on in our countries, because many of the post-Soviet countries are actually unknown, and due to political closeness as well, like the international community does not really know what's going on there in details. So this is our main kind of goal, and this is why we're basically close to this conference so much and trying to be as present as possible. However, different CANs in different regions have different resources, and for example, CAN Europe, which unites members from the European Union countries, are quite well established, like they're a super powerful organization. We, on the other hand, are mostly like a small team, like 3-4 people usually in the secretariat. There is a board, there is 60 members organizations, but we're not as well established, like institutionalized, etc. But we're still functioning as a hub of experts, as a place, as a platform where the knowledge exchange happens, and we still follow as many processes as we can. So this is what was just a short introduction for you to understand like where I'm coming from and kind of the universe that I exist in, like this CAN network. And if you want to know more, of course, you can look for a CAN network online. And yeah, this is basically the place from which I will be speaking after that. But now I give the word to Mariam, because she will tell you more about COP and the Paris Agreement.
Yeah, thank you, Olga. Before, I wanted also to add that Green Alternative is also a member of CAN network, and there are also other NGOs from Georgia who are members of that network. And also there are, I don't know, Christina, if you are aware about other CSOs who are working on environmental issues in Armenia, but we also have Armenian partners in the network. So I'm really happy that this network made me, like, linked me to the other people from various countries, like from regions. So it's a really great platform. Yeah. Now I would like to start our presentation. Yeah. So yeah, Boris introduced us in an interesting way. So thank you, Boris, for our introduction. Then we will discuss about COP, what is it and what happened at the last COP, what are the main results for our countries. And then Olga will tell you more about how to communicate COP, and she has really interesting, good examples that she plans to share with us about covering COP. Yeah, it's us. Now I also would like to ask you, like, Christina, sorry, I couldn't hear about you. Zira introduced herself, just to briefly know about you and your work.
I'm Christina from the Organization of Investigative Reporters of Armenia, and we also have a website, which is a media outlet of investigative journalists in Armenia, and I work for HEDC since I have been working since 2008, mostly covering environment in the last 5-6 years during this period. But I'm not a member of the organization you told. I don't know who is from Armenia. Who is the colleague you mentioned?
We have a board member, Amalia Martsunan from Hazir, but also other organizations that you can see at the link that I've put in the chat.
Okay.
But not all of them are active right now. So we'll be looking for some maybe new ones soon. But you can see all of them on the website.
Okay. I'm just a member in the Environmental Journalist Network, which is a global network based in US and have members in different countries. But I'm not very active because sometimes they are covering issues that are not relevant for Armenia. So I'm just following them, what kind of stories they are publishing. That's all. And I'm mostly I'm not just covering the events or issues. We also do investigative reporting in environment.
Okay, great. Thank you, and happy to have you here on our meeting. Tsira, if you would like to reflect in the beginning as well.
Yeah, I mean, we more or less know each other. I've worked with Christina as well. We have done like common investigative piece of the environmental pollution of precious metals mining, which was owned by a Russian business, and it is still working in Georgia, Armenia, and Russia. So we have this cross-border investigative piece that we did together. With a person who was working in HEDC. I'm not sure about now whether he's working or not. So it was called Golden Dust. It was a very interesting name, I guess, because it produced the dust, like the yellow dust from gold that is dispersed in the air. So I'm also, like Christine, working journalist. I've experienced for more than 10 years and mostly covering environment in the beginning, and now I've added also health issues. Also, I've had some projects which would connect environmental pollution and its health effects. So I think it's one of the ways that we could get other people interested in the topic, because it's not the climate change which is existing like separately. It is connected with everything. It's connected with every day of our everyday life, and we should do our best and find creative ways to show people how it's connected to our lives. So actually, when I shared this event yesterday on my Facebook wall, I also said that this is not as remote topic as it would seem. So I find it our role to communicate, to simplify it as much as we can, and have impact both on decision makers and also general people. So thank you very much, and yeah, I look forward to your presentation. I also am very interested whether you will cover like the fourth report that Georgia has submitted, like national report that Georgia has submitted. It's also very interesting what kind of obligations Georgia has as a country to fulfill its climate change convention, because as we know, Georgia is part of this convention. I guess Armenia should be also. So maybe I'm not sure what's the topic for the conversation today, but I think it's interesting topic for the future in terms of maybe energy generation, storage, and distribution, which could be like one of the most common topic for us to get people interested. Yeah. So like shortly that I could do about could say about myself. Sorry if it's a long answer. But
thank you.
I'm happy to contribute with this coverage in the future, as you know.
Thank you, Tsira. Thank you so much. And it's also interesting that you mentioned some topics that you would like to hear from us. I will try to mention them as well, but yeah, we can continue cooperation, and yeah, I will be always happy to respond to your questions. Yeah, and it was also interesting that you mentioned your publication. I would really love to see it. Maybe later I will ask you to send me that.
I will put up the link here and you will all see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. Do we have another participants joined if they would like to present themselves? Like if they do not want to speak, they can put it in the chat. Who are you? Where are you from? And what do you do in your country? Then another question we had, how many times you have been to COP? Yeah, if someone had been already at COP.
No.
Okay, so great. On the one hand, that yeah, now we will discuss and really hope to see you at next COP. Okay, so let's start talking about COP. So we hear this abbreviation COP so many times. So what does this mean? It's a Conference of Parties, which is a supreme decision-making body of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And this framework convention, like as we call it, UNFCCC, has 196 state signatories, parties, how we call it, and plus European Union. So based on this framework, we have COP every year. So it was first held in 1995, and it also serves to Kyoto Protocol. So, and one of the famous meeting of COP happened in Paris Agreement, where the parties signed Paris Agreement. It was 2015. So it's general information about COP, and I will not go in detail, but I would like to tell you that these COPs take place every year. The last year was exception due to pandemic, and that they needed to cancel it, and so they had this year they had really extensive agenda due to the extension, like cancellation of the previous COP. So it was 26 COP this year, and it's important that Conference of Parties takes decisions by consensus, which means that parties shall oppose it. So that's why, like every COP, they have their agenda, which they are discussing. But as its decisions are made by consensus, it makes it really hard to go to the solutions. So yeah, and it's interesting that this COP is space for every people who works on climate change issues. So at COP usually there comes country delegations from almost every countries who are signatories of the agreement. And also it's interesting that other people like observers, we are attending it with the status of observer, like NGO representatives, activists, local community members, or indigenous group peoples. And also, of course, there are media as well. And later I will show the statistics, how many media representatives registered for this COP. Yeah, so, and not only there are negotiations, there are also really interesting side events where we share our experience, we meet each other, like, yeah, and it's also interesting that there are always so many movements outside, and this year we had huge protests outside of venue of COP. So it's always like really the place where these so many things happening around. But as people say that it's not only COP, what we are doing about our work and climate change issues. After COP, we are also continue our fight on ground. This is some pictures about from COP. So it was the first COP took place in Berlin, and you see Angela Merkel was a minister at that time. Then we had 15th COP was in Copenhagen, and it's one of the famous COP that they could not, like parties could not manage to reach the consensus. Then we had 21st in Paris, which was successful as we have Paris Agreement. And this last picture from this year from Glasgow. Yeah, I also wanted to mention some of the main concepts. Of course, there are a lot. Yeah, but this is like most used, but varying the countries, they also have various concepts as well. So this is first widely used NDC. What does this mean? It's a country's emission reduction targets. And it is nationally determined contributions that countries say that they would submit it voluntarily. And like my country, for example, and I guess all of the countries from our region submitted second updated NDCs to UNFCCC, and we will discuss it later as well. Paris rulebook it's really important that like based on the Paris Agreement, we have this rulebook, and this year COP was to negotiate about the rules of Paris Agreement, and they managed to finalize the rulebook. So it's a legally binding international treaty on climate change. Also, climate finance is actively used term, which means that it's all finances that aims at reduction emissions or reducing vulnerability of human and ecological systems. We have carbon sinks as well. It was really popular during that COP because it's anything that absorbs more carbon. So it can be plant, ocean, soil, and so on. So this year it was like nature-based solutions, and like nature was linked to the climate change issues a lot. So these carbon sinks, we actively use term as well. Just transition is also really important in this process, which means ensuring that no one is left behind from this transition process. For example, while we have coal and we are planning to shut down all the coal plants and mining, so what will happen to those people who are involved in the industry? So they are not only this, but one of the example. And climate justice is also important, that we see that due to the climate change, people are affected disproportionately, but we know that some of the nations have more contributions to this change. So we should ensure that these people who has more burdens, that they receive enough support from that countries that they adapt to climate change. I also wanted to show you various videos. There are so many materials but we don't have much time. We will share this presentation later with you, and maybe you will watch it. But I want to show you.
I just wanted to say maybe we should show this one.
Yeah.
1 minute.
Me and Onka will really like that one.
I think you should close what you're sharing. Make sure you put the share sound, and then just go by link. It's not gonna work if you click on the image. It's just image. Yeah, could you see it now? Yeah, actually. Yep. Not sure if we can hear it. Let's try. No, we can't. You need to close share and then put a sound. Yeah, I have this share sound already. I don't know. Yeah. Why it's not. Yeah. breaking
It's
in.
my dorm and
Okay.
fire alarm, sorry.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I really like how Russia hides behind its forests. Because those are carbon sinks. And
Yeah. Okay, I hope you enjoyed. I like it. It's done in a funny way, but yeah, reflects reality. Yeah, about the Paris Agreement, with this slide, I wanted to show you that it's not only about emissions reduction, so it's also about adaptation and cooperation, and so it has various articles that, yeah, and in, like what is really negotiated all the time, it's about mitigation. So it's the chart which shows that what is planned. So the plan is to stop this change at the 1.5 Celsius degrees, like it's the best way, but yeah, the last point is to 0.2 degrees. Yeah, and this is how the current scenario goes and current policies. So if we continue our pathway as we are doing now, we will be exceed even 3.1 Celsius. And every year we have UMAP, which produces gap emission reports. So as countries are submitting their NDCs, which I mentioned earlier, so they are calculating on which track we are now. So this report is really criticized by our colleagues. For example, Russia is in green here, but as they calculated with this even not accurate calculations, we see that it's the NDCs which are submitted, not all NDCs are submitted yet, but it shows that only 7.5% emissions will be reduced by 2030, which is really not enough. We will need to reduce it at least 30%, and ideal scenario 55%, so is needed. So now about this COP. I wanted to hide this number and ask you about the media. So this COP was really important, and so much like tension was around it, and so many people had different expectations, even most of the people high expectations as well. So in total we saw that more than 39 people registered for the conference. This year it was also hybrid, like online was also had, and there are so many recordings that you can, if you will be interested to watch it, all of them are provided, some side events and the negotiations as well. And from media, it was around 40,000 people registered. Yeah, and the venue, I always saw that so many journalists are chasing some people. Like there were so many leaders as well, so it was really important. And the goals was to secure global net zero and keep 1.5 degrees, adapt to protect communities and natural habitats vulnerable to climate change, to mobilize finances, and also to work together on it and to cooperate. Yeah, these are some pictures. I took some of them. So there were like these high-level negotiations by the party representatives and the leaders. If you saw, there were even Barack Obama and our ministers also attended it. But it's also interesting, like these people are attending COP every year. So this year, for example, Barack Obama was really enthusiastic on for these changes. But yeah, previous COP, like when he was also president, we know what he did, for example. Yeah, and these pictures, it was, I wanted to show that there were so many protest actions outside. Yeah, I like this picture. And it's people from our region who works on climate change issues. And so the COP is really great opportunity for us to meet and share our knowledge and also reflections of COP negotiations. Yeah, so based on this COP, we have Glasgow Climate Pact, which has mitigation and adaptation goals. And the most important was about Article 6, which was about carbon market and the Paris rule book. So they managed to finalize working on the carbon Paris book, and it was the last article. So it's not finished, like negotiations are still going on. But it's good that they managed it. There are so many critiques that Paris Agreement is not ambitious enough, and I share these critiques as well, but yeah, it was a progress. These are some reflections on COP. Yeah, the last closing session was really emotional for most people. Yeah, because the last one was about deciding about coal, what would be the future, about phasing out or phasing down. And it was already decided that the countries would sign to phasing out coal. But in the end, it appeared that China and India refused it. So in the declaration, we have now phasing down. But even they would write phasing out, I would adapt it. I would be happy, but yeah, if it would be happen. And I see that, like, for example, here we have Greenpeace, quote from Greenpeace, that young people will not tolerate to these outcomes, for example. Oxfam say that they have impression that these leaders, they are not living on the same planet as rest of us. We had a quote from Can International, Tasnim, that she said, this COP had achievements and we will continue fighting for this on the ground to achieve that and to not leave this as a words. And then there was also already updated their main page that it says we already started working on COP 27. Yeah, so many like aspects remained for next year COP negotiations. So not all these things we are decided. Yeah, it's about upcoming COPs. So next year we will have COP in Egypt, after that in United Arab Emirates, and after that in Eastern Europe. So yeah, I really would like to meet next COP to you, and I really hope that you will also cover these issues really actively, because it's really important for us and for people and for everyone to really save the planet, humanity, and biodiversity we have. Now, I would like to hear about your questions if you have. Yeah, it was, I know, the really brief and general overview. Like, it's even more interesting than I managed to describe. And it's another experience, like when you were attending, it's completely different even than you words can express. Okay, if not, you can always write in the chat. Yeah, and now I will like over to you, Olga. Would you like me to stop sharing and you will?
Yeah, I'll share my screen. Okay, so basically my intention was to give you a short but meaningful overview of the results or of the position of our 3 countries, and then Mariam will talk about Georgia, so Armenia, Belarus, and Ukraine. And I want to start with saying that it's actually, in general, the participation of our countries, of these 3 countries, in COP, and actually, like, knowing that Diana is from Kyrgyzstan as well, like Kyrgyzstan, same thing, is nowhere near what we would what we would want to see, because our delegations are usually not that big. Civil society, I'm not even mentioning. Like, I will talk about this in more details later. But in general, like, there's shouldn't be so difficult to find the results and to find what was actually decided, but it's always seems like hunting a little bit, like trying to search for some secret information. So just wanted to share this feeling with you and underline the importance of more people actually from our countries following and understanding why it's important to participate in these platforms. And another thing I wanted to mention is that at the same time, we need to understand that most of the work is being done between COPs, so on the national level, on the local level. And it helps you not to be devastated by the results of COP, because they're usually just showing trends, international trends, and like how aware are these countries about what's going on, how present they were in this international platform. So it's not about actually like writing concrete plans for each country in this conference. So don't expect that. But what about trends? Then I'll try to cover fast but efficient. I made some short summaries of what I've heard, what I've seen, what I've managed to find. So about Armenia, my short personal summary was that they want to plant trees and promote nuclear power. That was my general kind of overview, and to kind of support that with some quotes and some information from the president, who was speaking at the high-level event. And you also need to understand, during COP there are different formats. So during the first and second week, first few days, like Monday, Tuesday, usually, this is a platform for high levels to speak. So the representatives of the countries come and say what they want to do, what they want to achieve, how good they are, etc. So they usually try to share some achievements, and it already shows if the president or if a high level did not come, means that they probably do not prioritize the conference as much. So it's already like the first notion that you can pay attention to. And so what the president said is actually really funny, because he mentioned climate neutrality, as this is one of the most popular words during this COP and right now. Like, to become climate neutral means that your country emits emissions that the ecosystem is able to absorb. So basically you go like, you achieve the net zero. What you emit, you can absorb. And he said that Armenia will achieve this in the second half of the century. So I think that it might be between 50 and 99 or something like that. So it's not a concrete commitment, And then there were a lot of general words about the adaptation, the forestation, investment in renewable energy, energy efficiency, new high technologies, and promoting nuclear energy at the end. So, and before previous COP 2019, there were at least some mentioning of like hectares of the forest they wanted to plant or something, you know, at least some numbers. This time it was lacking very much. And also there is a quote from our member from Armenia about the word play that almost all of our countries use, because the situation is that in the 1990s, we had Ukraine, Armenia, Georgia, like Kyrgyzstan, like we had a huge drop in emissions because a lot of the industries were closed. And so naturally, because of, we suffered economically, but we really reduced our emissions a lot. And so right now, our countries like to use 1990 year to compare. So for example, 40% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions for Armenia compared to 1990 level actually means 50% increase compared to level of today, right? So this is a wordplay that helps you to appear ambitious while not actually being it. So you also need to really pay attention to this. This is the same thing that Ukraine did. This is the same thing that Russia does, like all of our countries, basically. I think only Kazakhstan has actually overdone emissions from 1990. All of other countries are actually lower right now. And we also, of course, do not support the plans for development of nuclear energy, and we try to speak as much as we can about this, but it seems that right now this will be a huge challenge because the countries that actually commit to climate neutrality, we already hear that they are planning to do that with help of nuclear power. And this is the same that is coming from China. This is the same that we see in Ukraine and in other countries. And in our region, especially, we have this as a not only environmental hazard, economical hazard, because it's super expensive and it becomes more expensive every year that you build it. But we have a geopolitical influence from Russia that wants to build these nuclear power plants. So this is another very important issue to look for. And this is especially for Central Asia very important. And then I have this kind of three main points. So as a journalist, you need to understand what could be a focus that you follow in those words, in those speeches that you hear, in those articles that you might find on official websites of ministries, etc. So for example, for Armenia, because it's a vulnerable country, it may be adaptation. And Armenia also does not, is not part of Annex 1. Which means that they are eligible for international funding. And a different focus could be also energy independence, because as far as I know, Armenia gets most of its energy from abroad. And so energy independence, community level, it might be a good focus to look for in the speeches. It might be a good platform for your questions, for example, if you manage to interview someone. Then there are always risks that you need to take into account. And for Armenia, I've seen this as the fact that the numbers are lacking, so there are no hardcore commitments, and of course the desire to develop nuclear and hydropower plants. This is something that our members speak a lot about, the small hydropower plants, same as in Georgia, that they actually destroy ecosystems instead of helping the people. And civil society, because also I represent a network of civil society organizations, so this is always a part that I'm paying most of my attention to, whether the civil society is even present. And for our countries, it's a huge issue because usually there's like 1 or 2 people, and some of them are not even living permanently in Armenia. So it's important to stay connected to those who will come for sure. And this is something that like the network can help you, or your colleagues, etc. So something that you can also, you know, get acquainted with colleagues within projects like this. And then you need to understand whether there are actually any civil society present, or maybe there's someone in Armenia and they follow the negotiations, and you can connect to them. You can have their number and you can ask questions while you are in the negotiations. I will try to be quicker. Belarus is, of course, the most surreal right now to speak about, because there is a huge political, humanitarian, social crisis going on right now, and listening to them speak about the ambitious climate policy seems like from a parallel universe. What has been mentioned is, yes, they submitted the renewed NDC. Of course, like no quality consultations with civil society been done. I don't even mention that. And again, the emissions are not really going to be reduced by 35%, but much less when we compare it to the recent levels that we have in Belarus. And of course, the nuclear power plant was mentioned that has been built, and it costed them more than 10 billion, and now they don't know where to sell this energy because no one wants to buy it. So there are a lot of questions to Belarus apart from the climate perspective, because like it's impossible to actually have a climate policy without basic human rights, so it's impossible to develop anything ambitious in this case without all parts of that, without civil society participation, without actually communicating with other countries, which is a huge problem for Belarus right now. So all these questions, and of course, no one from the civil society of Belarus actually went because they have so much on their plate right now, and most of them are actually moving out and trying to establish new organizations. So yeah, and the focus for Belarus anyway, I think that might be actually local level. This is something that our members told us, that they really went down to like the neighbors and like the really local level, and they teach them how to protect their rights, how to write official letters to the governments, etc. And actually, you might have heard that like COP is such an international event and that it connects people from all over the world, but it's actually also a good platform if you are working with cities directly, because a lot of cities like networks like C40, for example, Covenant of Mayors, they will do some events there, side events, so-called. They will organize themselves during COP, and they will use this platform as well to promote the leadership of the local level. So if this is something that is interesting for you, you will also, first, you will find most probably you will find someone or an interesting event or a person to speak to, or you can even organize something if it's, if you're really working closely with the local level. Of course, the nuclear risk is again here, and as I said, it will be probably more and more present. I've heard, I personally did not come actually to COP. It was unfortunate at last moment I couldn't, but I followed online, and I've spoken to many of my colleagues who said that there were so many young people, volunteers, people who actually were promoting nuclear power plants and nuclear energy in a really like effective manner, like the religious volunteers, that come to you and they start to speak. And so this will happen more and more, as far as I know, and they will be trying, they will try to be more and more present in the climate platform. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to be ready with like the latest information, the latest arguments to speak to them. We cannot just ignore them. And the civil society, of course, is, I already spoke on that in Belarus. Actually, even if the civil society situation in your country is difficult, COP can again be a platform to speak about that, because it unites a lot of international attention, a lot of international organizations, and we usually speak during COP on the issue of civil society participation in COP, because it's sometimes hard to actually get into the room of negotiations, because they give you like tickets and you need to get it, and sometimes it's complicated. So it has never been easy, but for our countries especially, this might be a platform to speak more openly about the role of civil society and why it's important to support them to come to this conference. And then I will finish with Ukraine, which actually had, compared to other countries of our region, a pretty decent delegation, I would say, even from the civil society point of view. And it did join quite a number of like international commitments and agreements. Not all of them are legally binding, but like most of them, as I said, like show trends, like which direction countries are looking at. And yeah, the coal phase out was announced that Ukraine will phase out coal till 2035. But the biggest company that actually has more than has 75% of the coal power plants, they announced their own date, and it's 2040. So we're dependent on them on that. So it's a double date. But here are like the main agreements that Ukraine joined. It's the Declaration on Forest and Land Use, the Global Methane Pledge to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2020. And Power in Post-Coal Alliance. This was the platform where Ukraine actually announced about phasing out coal till 2035. And that was a different kind of event, which was not like fully organized by the Ukrainian government or anything like that. It was mostly organized by the youth who was present at the COP from Ukraine. It was like actually like 3 people. But they were connected to the YUNGO, which is the youth constituency of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it's basically a body of young people from all over the world. And we have some Fridays for Future activists who joined it. And there was UNICEF present, who is becoming more and more interested in like promoting youth participation in climate change. And they've reached out to Ukrainian delegation and actually had a bilateral meeting with them, which I wanted to mention because I think that it's a good sign that kind of broaden the people who are talking to each other. So it's not only delegation, civil society and journalists, but also like young people coming into picture. And big international organizations like UNICEF, for example. And so for Ukraine, what could be a focus? It's of course mitigation, because we do emit a lot of CO2, and we do have a lot of pollution from coal and a lot of emissions from coal. And of course, the fact that we have signed association agreements, same as with Georgia. And this actually binds us into a lot of actions and presses us in a good way into a right direction, I would say. And we're really, eager to follow on those agreements, or at least they can be used as an argument, as a leverage to actually remind that it's not only about climate change and what the activists want, it's actually about what the EU wants, and that's important for Ukraine. And also, between those announcements during COP, have we done our homework? What have we been doing all during the year, between the COPs? So it's also interesting to take into account. The risks, of course, is the big business, like the oligarchy of the fossil fuels that is present in Ukraine. And there is even rumors that we might finally have our own pavilion, and it costs a lot of money to have your own country's pavilion during COP in the negotiation space, where you can organize your events, put your materials, do a photo zone or whatever, but it costs a lot of money. And in Russia's case, it's funded by Rusal, I think Rosatom, someone else, the big businesses. And might be a case for Ukraine as well. So that's a big risk, and you need to pay attention to who's behind that, And the civil society actually, as I said, becomes more powerful. I'm glad to see that. Hope to see even more next year. Also, I will not speak directly about Kyrgyzstan here, but because I know we have participants from Kyrgyzstan and it's part of our region, I was really impressed by the youth participation and the civil society. It was like 2 people, but they've managed to be so active, and they're really hopeful for the next year. So I do hope that our region will be much more visible during the next COP. So keep your eye on the youth. If this is your target audience in some ways, think about how they can be actually engaged in this, because they are personally, I also consider myself youth. I'm 25, so I'm really scared but hopeful about the future, because when you talk about 2050, I will still be alive, unlike many of the politicians who make the decisions. So this is, this is the kind of a narrative that the youth has, and rightfully so. So that's why you need to engage them, and don't forget about them when you're making interviews, when you like thinking about what's your target audience is. Yeah, so that's it. I pass to Mariam. I can click if you want, and you can talk, so we don't change the screens.
Okay. Thank you, Olga. Yeah, I organized my part in a bit different manner. But yeah, the narratives which you mentioned, it's like active for Georgia as well and realistic. Yeah, it was only me, I guess, from Georgia, from the observer status, and it was our delegation this year at COP. Last year, like at the previous COP, we were more. Yeah, next slide. This is, yeah, I will try to tell you the main trends, but then, yeah, if Tsira and other journalists will be interested in a specific, then we can go deeply. So it's from like what you mentioned, Tsira. It's I took these main trends from the Fourth National Communication of Georgia to UNFCCC. So this report mainly speaks about the climate change impacts and the scenarios what will be developed in Georgia. So it tells us information about temperature rise, other like climatic like natural events, and also the hazards. So, and what are already changed in different regions, and what can be expected. Yeah, next one. And so generally Georgia is mentioned and like perceived as a one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, because we see our glaciers are melting, which causes flooding and flash floods to the communities. Yeah, and we see that these precipitation patterns are really different. Like in western part, we have precipitation increase, and while in the east we have a decrease of precipitation. So people and economic sectors need to be adapted to this change, and it's important what measures our government will take. It's about nationally determined contribution targets, which our government assigned, and it's like now we started to realize what is written there. So so many people are afraid that maybe this climate change, these obligations which we assigned to the international community, it will like hinder our economic development in the country. But in reality, what our targets is that our baseline year is 1990s, when the emissions were a lot. In 2015, our emissions accounted approximately 40% of emissions recorded in 1990. So now, like it seems that according to that trend, we will increase our emissions. So we are saying that it's emissions reduction, but it's reduction to comparing to 1990s. But to the current scenario, it will be increase. And our government says, yeah, it's we are a developing country. We need to develop our economy. So it's like, yeah, we will reduce it according to past, but for the current processes, we are increasing our emissions. Yeah, next slide. So yeah, maybe you saw that our delegation and our prime minister attended the COP this year and had a really impressive speech. Yeah, but in reality, I want to pay attention what's going on. For Georgian delegation, they did a great job, actually. They had a proposal on equitable geographical representation to UNFCCC, that they were saying that some Western East European countries who are developing ones, we do not have enough opportunities to be represented, and our voices are missed in this process. So we should ensure this equitable geographical representation. Now, like I didn't mention in the beginning that these countries are negotiating through groups. They are like member of various groups, and while negotiations, they are representing through these groupings. And Georgia was involved in various negotiations. After that proposal, they also managed that there are positive changes, that our representation, we will have representatives in various climate funds. We will have Georgian board members after this COP. Based on this proposal, the president instructed the secretariat to assess and report about this group underrepresentation at the next COP. So we will see how this process will be continued. Yeah, next slide, Olga. Yeah, Olga also mentioned that one of the results of this year, this COP, was the Glasgow Declaration on Forest and Land Use, and Georgia also signed this declaration. I don't know, there are many skepticisms about this declaration, but for our countries, it means that we will need to have really significant focus on forests, but in reality, what we'll see, I don't know, Sira, if you saw that, like now Georgia is developing new package of regarding the forest management, and it seems that they are trying to allow hunting in the forests and in the nature reserves. So there are local NGOs in Georgia who, and including my organization, who are protesting this. Instead of raising the conservation actions, they are doing vice versa. So we should follow this, how these forest issues will be developed. Another agreement was about methane emissions. Methane is like one of the main greenhouse gas after carbon dioxide. And for Georgia, it's interesting that as Georgia signed it, and we know that our government is really promotes building big hydropower plants, and we know that these dams are source of methane emissions, and no one speaks about it in Georgia. So it is one of the important issues that we will need to follow and emphasize. This is like Georgia has so many, actually many national processes related to climate change. We have these documents. Even now we are starting to develop climate and energy action plan, which was not so transparent at all until now. They had one meeting recently. We also plan to design national adaptation plan. We are starting it. We also have this climate change council, which is comprised of our ministers, and there are different working groups. And so it was just met once. So I don't know, I wish really to see that this council is really active and really doing something, because till now they just adopted this NDC, and it was their action so far in the 2 years. And we have also now it's interesting that maybe it's also worth to follow that in the climate funds, that they are increased money mobilized for the next actions. In Green Climate Fund, for example, we have accredited entity, which is a bank. I'm not so happy with it, but yeah, we will have more access to the funds from here, and to ensure that this money is spent for the vulnerable people and it reaches. So it is one track that we can follow in future. And yeah, general conclusions is that, I don't know, maybe then we will discuss as well. For me, what I saw, like the COP is really important, and we see that our government, like our delegation, tries to do as much as they can. But in reality, it seems that people in the country do not know anything what's going at COP. And generally, they are not aware, like after COP, what's going on in the country, what is climate change, even they are not aware of it. Like, and they are not, of course, as a result, involved in this process. So I think that media is really important and could play an important part in this process, that to raise awareness, promote the people participation, all of this process, and ensure the transparency of all the processes. Yeah, and if really, as our prime minister said, like, these words will stay just words if we will not have enough coordination and put the priority to climate change in the real actions and the policies. It's also important that we should be careful with the projects, because, for example, this nature projects is getting more and more active on, and maybe it's the common to other countries as well, to avoid greenwashing, because I assessed the projects on a local level in Georgia, and we see some of them are really greenwashing, and they have more harms to local communities and nature than the benefits. So it's really important. And we should ensure the link between these international commitments, what are said, and to the documents, to the national and local processes. So it's just general conclusions. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. There's a question from Tira, and I also have a question to Boris on the technical part. So do we need to hurry, and do we only have 20 minutes, or do people can stay longer, or like, how do we proceed now?
It's okay from my side to do longer. I'm not in a hurry, okay. So I don't know about the others. Yeah, we can.
Maybe you can put in the chat if you're okay with staying like 10-15 minutes longer. Those who, and then
I'm so sorry, but I can't, because I have another Zoom meeting right now and I have to go.
Okay, right now.
The others can, no, in 10 minutes I have to leave.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Then let's try to finish in time. I just for the process sakes, but still we can hear the question from Tira, I'm sure. I think.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I had some idea about how to proceed with the distribution of the information. I think that I agree, of course, with Mariam, and I mentioned it in the beginning that people really, I mean, in poor countries, people cannot, like, it's an idea that we cannot afford to think about climate change and things like that. It's like a topic which is like a higher range of development and so on and so forth. So I think it's our mission to simplify it in a way that everyone in the city, every citizen understands how climate change is connected to their lives. So I think, first of all, what I could do in Georgia is that to collect all the agreements that Georgia has made and has signed. For example, Maria mentioned the deforestation thing, also about the emission reduction commitment that Georgia has taken responsibility to reduce or to somehow regulate. So I think maybe I will collect all the documents and agreements that Georgian government took within this meeting and publish it and start with this process, also to proceed it for the future. Is it affordable? Is it possible? Who are the main players here? What are the obstacles that we will face in Georgia? So I think it's good. It will be a good start to start with the documents and to show everyone what Georgia is about to commit. And how realistic it is in terms of numbers. I also have a question in terms of, I'm not with you, but generally, as we know, the poor countries find it also always very hard to have good data about anything. It will be like, would it be about like, environmental flow of the rivers. It's interesting for us because our government has declared that the main energy producer will be hydropower sector, not solar or wind power, for example. In these terms, we lack almost any kind of data because since Soviet times, as you know, it's very expensive to have good quality data in poor countries. This could also be one of the topics of conversation. I'm sorry that it's too general comment, but I think that our today's conversation is quite general anyway. So we have to start with the general things and also with the commitment documents once more that Mariam was mentioning. I also have the initiative that maybe I make another interview with Mariam, which will post both on Green Alternative, on Cactus, and on now as well, to talk about the current commitment. This interview and proceed with it even before the end of this year. Yeah, and as you all know, I also want to write an article about solar power or wind power possibilities for Georgia. So, and also there will be issue about lack of data as well, but still we will work with the data that we have and have to demand for the rest from the government.
Thank you, Cira.
Well, thank you so much, Cira. Yeah, and your initiative and your willingness to be actively involved in this process. Actually, regarding the solar panels, I also had one research supported with the bio.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. I've read the.
I hope you will find it useful, and I'm ready to.
Yeah. So if you have. Yeah, if you have time in the learning process, I don't know what's your schedule, but maybe we arrange some other interview in terms of Georgia's commitment on the climate change. So.
Yeah, and we have, like, as I mentioned, documents developed and adopted. So yeah, we should really elaborate on them. Yeah, thanks a lot. And yeah, it's not only work. I always say I like doing this, so do not hesitate as I'm student here. But yeah, I will be always happy to contribute about these issues. Okay, thanks a lot. If there are not more questions, maybe Olga will continue about the communication.
Yeah, I will just try to quickly cover the concrete topic of how to communicate COP and then see if you have any other questions, because let me share, because I have some general information, some very concrete tips. So depending on what you will need, hopefully you will go to COP next year. This one already finished. How you can take part in the COP, that's a very good question. You need two things. You need accreditation and you need money. So accreditation for the press, I'm not sure how they get it, but we definitely have, like, I don't know, maybe even Boris knows, but like later, but Angelina Davidova for sure knows, and other like press colleagues, I can connect you, because I know how to get accreditation for a civil society organization. That's it. So you need accreditation in order to get in the conference rooms and, you know, into the money, you know, a lot of options available, so that it might be part of some project, some grant, some foundation might support you, or you yourself can pay for your organization. So it depends on your situation. Sometimes there are special projects for journalists, you know, where the prize is actually going to COP, but it's not, you know, all the time, because, you know, those projects are made by people and someone needs to plan for that, someone needs to execute that. So sometimes there are these opportunities as well. But the main things I wanted to cover, like as the basics, is that actually you need to be sure of three things. First, that you have your basics covered, meaning that you know actually what happens in your country in between COPs, what Mariam just explained about Georgia, for example. So what is actually a situation? What are the commitments already? And then you will be feeling much more comfortable during COP. When you hear something else, you can combine it with what you already know. So you need to understand general information about the latest updates in climate policy of the country that you will cover. And maybe talk to a few experts about their expectations. So people who are regularly going to COP, experts from ecological civil society organizations, for example, what are they expecting? Like what could be a solution, what could be a result of this COP, for example? And they usually even might prepare some kind of an article about that, like our expectations, blah, blah, blah. Then the second is, of course, the focus. If you manage to go to COP and you spend a week there, for example, don't expect to be writing like all day, every day, because there are so many things to do there, and you will be moving a lot. So you'll not be just sitting at the computer and writing, an article every day. So choose your focus, maybe a topic, or if it's a country, then choose a topic or a specific topic within the Paris Agreement, for example, if you're following some specific article, if you're following carbon sinks, adaptation, loss and damage finance, but first, of course, you need to understand the language. So you need to choose your focus, understand it before even, trying to go to COP. And of course, you need to be ready to contact people quickly during COP, because everyone is, running, and there are so many events happening at the same time. You need to have, the best is to have a number, and then to write to a person in WhatsApp or Telegram or whatever is the most popular messenger. So have those contacts beforehand, ask people around, like, who's going to COP, please give me their contact. And also be sure that those contacts are diverse. So you're not only following the delegation around, or that you're not only hanging around with the civil society organizations, that you have different people in your list, that you have maybe some youth, some international colleagues as well. For international perspective might be interesting, especially if you're following one topic. You want to also understand what the international organizations think about this topic. So those are the three basic steps. And then I also have some quotes, some suggestions from other fellow journalists that have been going to COP for many times. And this one is Angelina Davidova. Maybe you know her, maybe you don't, but this was her actually 12th COP. I was shocked. So she said that the most important things are to combine attending the official meetings like plenaries, lectures, side events, etc., with meetings, like unofficial meetings, basically meeting the CSOs, running around, meeting people not as part of some official panel. Then you need to, of course, keep track of what the delegation is doing. Meet them at least once. If you're not very close with them, try to meet them at least once. And ask some questions, hear what the position is. You can also go to the meetings of the regional CAN hours, because, for example, international CAN has its meetings only for members, and they check this. And in our case, it's not so many people from our region, so we're not close to friendly journalists or people who are from the region but not necessarily are our members. And these are meetings that usually happen almost every day, where also you exchange news, you understand what's happening. There are some experts from our region who are deeply involved into negotiations and will explain to you what is happening. It's also very useful. Get acquainted with other journalists who write about these topics. And also a tip from Angelina is to stay a few days after. If you, for example, go to second week, or if you go for both weeks, be sure to add 1 or 2 days if you can to your staying, because usually they do not finish on Friday. They finish I don't know how it is in your countries, but in Ukraine, we decide on our yearly budget this way, 4 o'clock in the morning, some Saturday or something like that. So this is the same thing. They have negotiations until late Saturday. They decide and they speak again, and they rewrite the drafts, etc. So if you can stay a bit longer, you will not be hectically searching for information in the plane or something like that. You will be able to breathe out and write some final article while you're still there. Then there are some also suggestions from Ukrainian journalist who has been to 8 COPs, from Olga Vesnyanka. Of course, choose the topics that are interesting for your region, for your audience, and there are topics like adaptation, energy efficiency, the knowledge transfer. And you can also search for those topics in the program of the UNFCCC conference, and follow your topic, and also question governments or the business messages with your comments. So try to ask, and that's why you need to understand the background. You need to understand whether something that they are actually promising is even doable, or is it legally binding, you need to understand their motivation, etc. And there's actually someone from Kyrgyzstan who has been to this COP. Not sure how many COPs she went to in general, but she's been very actively present during this one. And yes, she said that it's very important to read about the UNFCCC, to know the terms again, because when you are in the conference, everyone, sometimes if you're just, if you're from the outside, you will not understand what they're talking about. So you need to be ready and just prepare a little bit for the specific language, for the abbreviations that they use. And yeah, choose the focus for your country again, and work with national delegation, be close to them, try to get acquainted, try to understand who is in the delegation. And then another suggestion from Mariana actually is very civil society centered. She said that you should find the organizations, and usually there are organizations in Ukraine for sure, who have been going to COPs for many years, and they can actually help you prepare and give you comments and give you their vision, etc. So for example, I work in EcoAction, the Ukrainian NGO, and yeah, we've been since we started existing, we've been going to COPs and following and writing about it. And then I have some examples. I will try to make sure that you have this presentation, because there are hyperlinks on every of those pictures. So you can just click it and go to the website of this piece of news. And those are examples, so one by one. The first one is a bit outdated. It's like 2 years ago, but it's actually written by this Mariana Rybowska, whose quote I just read. And she actually also gathered some knowledge from the colleagues, from the journalists, in general, how to write about climate policy, how to write about climate change, but also about COP. And there are some abbreviations, like the main ones that you need to know in this material. So it's not very long, but it's, I think, a very interesting read, which also shares knowledge from the colleagues. Then there are two, so one from Anna Kerman, my colleague from EcoAction, and another one from Angelina Davidova, about the main results of COP and what they usually write if they follow their own country. So Anna follows Ukraine, Angelina Russia. They follow what also, they write also what it means for the country. So what could change, what actually it means for the current climate policy that we already have. So they usually include the general results and something that is connected to the country. Then the last one is actually a combination of authors. There's 7 or 8 authors wrote this, and it's super long, but it's very well structured. So in the beginning, you will see the list of what you will find within, and it's a very detailed kind of list of outcomes of this COP. So you can read this to get acquainted, but also it's an interesting idea. Maybe you can think to write with some other colleagues who are maybe experts in other topics, and then to have this joint material that covers all these different topics, because to write this kind of material on your own, it's impossible. I think it will take a lot of time, and it's impossible to follow all the topics at once. So that's also an issue. So it's, I think, a good example of a really structured and deep collaboration of journalists and experts. And here a little one is from our website. Actually, we did 2 materials, mostly covering the Leaders Summit. So what the governments have actually said and promised of our countries. Almost all of them, I think, except Moldova, have spoken during the high-level segment. And yeah, we then gathered the quotes from our members as reactions, as kind of assessment of whether something that they said was even made sense, and what our members actually think about. So we try to promote our members all the time. And you can also see on our website like what we published for other COPs, for other negotiations. Here, like the negotiations, UN negotiations in Russian, Переговоры ООН. You can find other materials from all the previous years that when the network existed, actually. Yeah, so this is something that also for you as a homework that you can study and see for yourself what's interesting for you. There are contacts at the end. I've also added our page. I don't know, maybe Mariam will add her as well. So the page of the Climate Action Network in Facebook and Telegram, you already have the link to our website. So if you need any other information on the network for me, then please reach out as well. And yeah, I think that the chat is full. I didn't manage to read it while I was speaking, so I will do it now. If there are some questions for me, then I didn't see it yet, so let me see. And if you have some questions right now or some reactions, then it would be great, because also I understand that COP is already finished, so it's a bit, you know, it's a long run until the next one, but this is exactly how you want to prepare for COP, like a year before.
I think there seem to be no questions at this point. So maybe one question from my side that, like, on a topic that really interests me. What is your impression on, out of those 4 countries that you have presented today, where was the coverage of the COP the biggest one?
Ukraine.
Ukraine, yeah.
Ukraine. Yeah, but it's also, for me, like, I work on climate change and climate policy, but I work in the post-Soviet countries, and so I see this connection between the freedom that the civil society has and the actually how active the country is. And it's like, for me, it's inseparable things. Like when the civil society, when the, I don't know, like local business, the cities, decentralization, when it's all possible, then the country is actually moving forward. And when it's really hard, and when it's not happening, and when there are, you know, like policies that are bringing you back to previous ages, you know, then the country is not moving forward. And that, you know, that is the same for climate change. So it's unfortunate, but right now actually it's not as disastrous, because there is online communication. There's a lot of opportunities to actually follow things when you're not actually in the country. So for example, what is happening with Belarusian activists right now, they move out, they join other organizations, they register their own organizations in other countries, and they're still, like, the people are still there. They're still, you know, they're still experts, they're still active, they still want to change things for the good, but they are doing this in a different place, you know. So yeah, so they still follow, but it of course really damages the progress that has been done. So that's why I think Ukraine, and we do have a lot of support from the donors, from like a lot of attention. There's Just Transition campaign that's just like a, you know, a star child, and everyone wants to know about it. So it's something that I actually think that Georgia can do as well, because it's also a signed association agreement, and I think that Georgia is like the second place goes to Georgia. And I think that there might be more people, like if not for the red zone, I think there would be much more civil society present in COP this year, because from Georgia no one could travel basically.
Are there any other questions? If not, I would stop the recording at this point. So thank you very much to everybody for joining us today.